Now we're going to be talking about user registration. So we're looking still in website interactivity. We have a nice robust form here that's going to be real world. We're going to be doing a lot of things here. PHP to JavaScript, PHP to sessions. We're going to be able to use hidden fields, and we're going to do a lot of processing and validations as well. Now I have a nice little way that we can actually fill in the samples here so we don't have to do that. And that should be good for you. You just want to change your email address to something that's not going to be in the database already. We could check that. And you can just fill it in, and you can pick a membership option. You can answer some things down here. You have to put in a password. There's no limit on the client side here. There's nothing there that says you have to have it between this and that. You should have that in there saying you need to have a password 6 to 8 characters, something like that, 6 to 15. And when we fill in the samples, this is going to change that email address again. So you just want to be sure that you're passing the right email address so you don't get any unwanted information there or make some redundant things that you really don't want to have to take care of. But we will check again for Webmaster and just submit that. And also, you normally don't have the password there sent, but this is just an example. And then you can see we output everything right here. We send a mail. We check for success or failure. We check the variables that are all sent. And we create a password here using some encryption. And then we actually have the SQL statement here, which is going to be doing an insert into. And we can show what that looks like. All the values there. A lot of times you might insert the actual selection that you had to make it easier to pick the selection to refresh that data. In this example, we're not passing that into the database, but you could and you should because it'll make things a lot easier to update that information. But you can see we can pass that in there. We have the normal thing we've been looking at with insert. We have the parentheses separated columns that we have here up to this period. And then we have the values in single quote for the strings and an integer or numeric data here that doesn't have that in there. But everything was successful. We can take a peek at the database, and you can see we're using the table users. If we click there to select that, we can see that this is the table structure here, as you can see, all the different fields that we can have in there. And we can browse this and see that we do have different elements in here, different data in here in this table. And incidentally, this is also a part of the working with databases here, retrieving data, and then you can see everything output for you. And you can see that George Lee is just a sample account there that you can duplicate. It's not worried about that, and it's going to check on email address, so you can worry about checking that in regards to making sure the data is going to be in an exact order, and you don't have to worry about whether or not you have duplicates and things like that. Now we're going to go back, and we see that the page is expired. We could refresh that. That's because we have header details in there. We refresh it, and you see that we automatically jump back to our page here because, like I said, that email was already in the database. When you refresh it, you're trying to go and do that again, submit the same data. Oftentimes, this is why you don't want users to be able to do that. So you get kicked back here to the registration page, and then you're asked to put in another email address to confirm that. And you can see that this is coming up here in the middle section here. We'll see what's going on behind the scenes. Most of the data is filled in for whatever you had there. Also note that the selection lists are taken care of as well. I'll show you how we do that. And notice that the password wasn't echoed there because that's not something you do. Because that makes it easy for somebody to be able to figure out how to get back and grab the password. But it's really not a standard thing to put that password back on the form field because it's not necessarily as safe as if you didn't have it there echoed out. Force the user to put that password back in. And then if you fill this in, again, you can keep the same email address there or you can change it. But then you have to put in the password, whatever that may be. And then you can actually submit. And we're going to check for required fields as well. And now we're saying that warning again. Remember in the email and PHP information, you want to put the @ sign in there. So I'll let you do that. It's not a big deal if you're testing and you're developing. You know you're going to use email accounts that are useful, but at the same time, you know you have to put that @ in most of the time, and I didn't want to confuse you by having it there all the time, so I'll leave that up to you to put that there. But otherwise, it still tries to continue. And that's a problem if it puts it into the database and still tries to continue when in fact the email isn't a valid email. So that's a problem. So you can put in your database field there. In the database table, you could add another field there that says confirmed, for example. And then you could send a confirmation email to the actual user, and then you could force them to click on that link from their email address, and then they can update that field in the database by going back to your website to that link and update the database. And that's a really robust way to do it. We don't do that in this particular case, but together with the things I've shown you, it's quite easy to do that. Just pass a link back and give some sort of confirmation ID that you can create yourself based on the user ID or something like that. Up to you. We do echo the password here, but not a problem. This password is going to be sent to the user in their email, and that's going to be taken care of. But again, make something robust that you don't have to worry about the fact that you have data now in there that's going to be a problem, but the email address isn't valid. So looking at some code, we can take a peek at the user registration. This is what we have here. You can see we have hidden fields there, and the hidden fields are really cool because they actually allow us to put some selection information. We can put in the session what the user actually selected in these fields. That's passed, so that when we need to come back and actually update these fields, refresh the fields and make sure that they're set, we can't just do that by echoing here to the field itself. You can only do that with input fields and text areas. You can't do that otherwise. These need to have JavaScript placed in there at the bottom of the page. And you can see that we're creating some JavaScript here, and then we're using some dynamic PHP code here to actually echo out the values that are stored in the session. What we do is we put quotes here. Just in case this wasn't set for some reason, this will come back as the empty string. You don't have to worry about it. And of course, the only way this data can have any values anyway is if you put something in it. So we know that we're not going to put something that's non-numeric. Otherwise, we'd have to check for that as well. So what this does is parse into JavaScript, client-side JavaScript, and this is server-side. So we pass back the numeric value of the selected index for the form field, which is form access period, the first one that you see there. This first one at the top. Selected index -1 would be nothing selected. We have 0, and then 1, 2, and 3 would be the other 3. We'll look at a lot of different ways that we'll be processing this information. And JavaScript is going to come into play to submit the form, because validations on the client side are very important as well, even though some browsers, some users don't have to have JavaScript enabled. So you really have a fallback to check and a requirement to check on the server side to really completely check all the data before it goes into your database. But then again, we also need to get some sleep sometime too. And when we work on our small businesses, we don't have time to make mission critical websites. We should check for vulnerabilities, of course, but you get the idea. Use this to get the job done. We see a lot of websites out there that may not be up to speed as far as graphics are concerned, but at the same time, they really need to be up to speed as far as vulnerability checking, security checking, and things like that. But you can see these other fields here are going to do the same thing. Question 1, question 2, question 3, and all of them are going to be updated. You can just cut this out, this code here, and just cut it out and then refresh the page, and you'll notice that those selection boxes don't update. So you can do that yourself, and that I leave up to you to take a peek at if you want to see how that works. We have a lot of code up top that we're going to talk about, and we have some code that's passed here for the middle code that's going to be dynamic HTML that's passed through. And the submit area here, we're going to make sure that we have the required fields. This is JavaScript out of the scope of what we're talking about here, but you get the idea that we're going to check to make sure the length of some of those fields isn't going to be 0 or less than 1, so they can't be empty. So we check them to make sure they're required. And we use a variable called beRequired. And if beRequired isn't going to be what we want it to be, it needs to be true there. If it's false, it's going to come out of this and drop out. Otherwise, we're going to set our hidden fields using the dot value to our selected index for the different questions that we have there, the different selection lists. And then we're just going to submit the form, and that goes to our register.php file. So it's all set up for us there. That's the JavaScript, and I'm kind of just going through the motions here. It's up to you to kind of see how this goes. It's really easy. We're setting values here. Dot value is going to get the value, and dot selected index is going to get the selection list value. And in the form field here, we're just getting the form from the document, document.form, same thing we do in all the other sections. And then we just put in sample data here. This is how I do it. And that function is going to be attached to one of the buttons here, this button, and we have resetting and submitting as well. If you look at reset, you can see that there's nothing extra attached to that. You have to look at another example when we do the reset. But this example, when you hit reset, it doesn't reset everything, because resetting doesn't reset to everything blank. You have to use a JavaScript function to do that. And in the browser, when you actually reset that, it's going to think that those values that you sent on the server side, it's going to think that those are the default values that you set up when you use the text editor. So reset doesn't work exactly how you might intend to. You can see a later example for information on that. Otherwise, we use the on click to submit a form. As you can see, that's the submit form. This is the syntax for that. And the other one has the form fill, and that's right down there. Those are all JavaScript related. Server side and client side, that was the client side. So now we can get into the details of what is up top here, how we set those session variables, and what happens when we go to the register.php file to actually submit this information.